I believe the Amarna Tablets should be dated to the 10th century BC and not the 14th century BC as it currently is. I previously identified Labayu of the Amarna Tablets with the biblical personality Saul, the first king of the United Monarchy period of the Kingdom of Israel. I demonstrated that Labaya and Saul both controlled the same territory and both died in Gilboa, fall into a coalition of rulers from identical cities. So in this video, I'm going to look at other biblical figures from the early monarchy period whose names we can find in the Amarna letters, all done from a linguistic standpoint. Let's start with Labayu's son, Mutbal, from EA 255 and 256. His name means man of Baal, as I demonstrated before. However, I'll do it again for this video so I have these name comparisons all recorded in the same place. Saul had a son named Ishbal, which also translates to man of Baal, as we could confirm in 1 Chronicles chapter 8 verse 33. And Ner begat Kish, and Kish begat Saul, and Saul begat Jonathan, and Malchishua, and Abinadab, and Ishbal. And looking at the synchronicity that we find with the Amarna period, both sons ruled from Transjordan after the death of their father. I'll just get the biblical account of that in 2 Samuel chapter 2 verse 10. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and reigned 2 years, but the house of Judah followed David. Notice here he was referred to as Ishbosheth, man of shame. Very important for identifying another figure from the Amarna tablets that we will get to later. Next we'll address Ayab, mentioned by Mutbal in EA 256, who himself wrote EA 364 that was addressed to Akhenaten. In the Amarna letters, it's quite common to have the theophoric element prefixed with a prosthetic aleph. What that means in simple terms is that the part of your name that would contain the name of a god would be prefixed with the letter A. I'll give a few examples. In EA 201, we have Artmania, who was the king of Ziribashani. Manfred Meyerhofer suggested that his name is Indo-Aryan and has the meaning in the memory of the god Rata. In EA 170, Aadumi, ruler of a town in Becker Valley. Some suggested translating the name as it is the god Hadu. EA 265, Atamaya. This is the Akkadian vocalization of the Egyptian name Patamos, which is the commissioner of Pharaoh. It is also given as Tamashi in EA 303. Since we're dealing with the same individual, we can conclude the Aleph at the beginning of Atamaya is prophetic and being added to the name of the god Ptah. And finally, Eshapa in EA 31. Frauq Grondal believes this to be the name of the Canaanite god Rashab, followed by the genitive belonging to. Arashab has been used in other texts with the modification described as not uncommon. So given the understanding that a prefix would be placed before a god, Ayab should be understood as Ya'ab. Ya is the father, which translates into Joab from the Bible, who was David's general during this early monarchy period. In my other video, I go into scripture explaining the motivations of Pharaoh looking for Joab, giving insight into the family ties of Akhenaten. But today we'll stick to translating the names only to keep this video short. Next, from EA 256, we have Dadua, meaning the beloved or favorite of a deity. In the Bible, David can be transcribed as Dude, like as in 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verse 13. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David, this is Dude here, from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. It's argued that this is the Akkadian equivalent of Dadu, which is how we identify Dadua or Dudiya as David. Staying in EA 256, we have Yeshua, the biblical figure from the early monarchy period, Jesse. Yeshai in the Hebrew means deity exists. Yeshua has the same meaning, and we know that Jesse was David's father. So EA 256 that was written by Mutbal, that I identify as Ishbal, contains the names of at least 3 biblical figures that we can also identify from the early monarchy period. So now let's look at other tablets that identify other biblical figures from this time period in Israelite history. In EA 314 to 316, we find the name Pubal, which translates to from the mouth of Baal or utterance of Baal. In the Bible, we have Jonathan's son who was spared from being killed by the Gibeonites in 2 Samuel chapter 21 and verse 7. But the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the Lord's oath that was between them, between David and Jonathan, the son of Saul. Mephibosheth means the mouth of shame. And just as we saw with Ishbal, they probably replaced Baal with Bosheth, which is shame. So his name was most likely Mephibaal, allowing us to make the biblical identification of Pubal. Next, we'll look at Shuardata from the Amarna Tablets, who I did mention was Achish in a previous video. I'll just read 1 Samuel chapter 27, verses 1 and 2. And David said in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape into the land of the Philistines. And Saul shall despair of me, to seek me any more in any coast of Israel. So shall I escape out of his hand. And David arose, and he passed over with the 600 men that were with him unto Achish, the son of Maok, king of Gath. While I made the connection that Achish was Shuardata, I never explained how. Annalise Kamenhuber suggests that the name Shuardata can be translated as the sun has given. Then, R.W. Corney argues that the name Achish is the Hurrian shortening of Aki with the deity name missing, giving the example Aki Teshub, meaning Teshub has given. However, showing that this biblical timeline draws parallel with the Amarna Tablets, I would identify the missing deity as the Hurrian sun god Shemigi, and give the full name Akishimigi, which would mean the sun god has given, as it was with Shuardata. Thus, Shuardata and Akishimigi are alternate versions of the same name in 2 politically related languages. The next name we have is Aziru. I have given a full explanation of his name before, but I will do it again here. I'll read 2 Samuel chapter 8 verse 3. David smote also Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, king of Zobah, as he went to recover his border at the river Euphrates. Hadadezer means Hadad is the helper. Pierre Baudriel and Javier Teixedo proposed that the short version of his name was Ezra, as demonstrated by their study of the Melkart stele, where they had read Bar-Hadad, son of Ezra the king, the Rehobite, king of Aram. I have previously identified the missing deity from Aziru's name as the Syrian storm god Hadad, and removed the placeholder at the end to give the name Hadadazir, which would make the Amarna and the biblical names virtually identical. While we are only comparing names in this video, it's worth pointing out that Aziru's kingdom of Amuru went through an expansion during the Amarna period that would dominate Syria and Lebanon, with Aziru casting off allegiance to Egypt to sign a treaty with the Hittites. Abraham Malamat wrote that this expansion was similar to that of Aram Zobah through Hadadezer that we read about in 2 Samuel. So we aren't just matching names from the Amarna Tablets with figures from the early monarchy period, they also correspond to the territories and historical accounts of both figures. Getting back to names, next we have Teshub from EA 58, who was ruler somewhere in northern Syria. You probably recognize the Teshub as a god's name mentioned earlier in this video, so we are really trying to identify a Tehu. In the Bible, we find the name Tou from the early monarchy period, who was the king of Hamath and an ally of David's in his war against Hadadezer. I'll just quickly get that in 2 Samuel chapter 8 and verse 10. Then Tou sent Joram his son unto King David to salute him and to bless him, because he had fought against Hadadezer and smitten him. For Hadadezer had wars with Tou, and Joram brought with him vessels of silver and vessels of gold and vessels of brass. I'm proposing that his full name may have been Tou Teshub and that Tehu Teshub ruled from Hamath, even though this is not specified in the Amarna Tablets. I'll do one more for this video, and that is the name Lupaku, who was the commander of the troops of Hatti, campaigning in northern Syria from EA 170. The first part of his name could be read as man, and the second part we aren't so sure, but given what we know about him leading a major assault on the land of Amku, which is Beka Valley, and that Supilului Umas campaigned against the kingdom of Mitanni, which is Aram Naharaim, we can make a guess to what his name is in the Bible if the Amarna Tablets are actually synchronized with the early monarchy period. I'll read 1 Chronicles chapter 19 and verse 16. And when the Syrians saw that they were put to the worst before Israel, they sent messengers and drew forth the Syrians that were beyond the river. And Shopak, the captain of the host of Hadadezer, went before them. Shopak is the army commander of Hadadezer that returned from Aram Naharaim to defend Amaru against David's forces. Shopak contains the Akkadian element Shu, which means he. The final part of his name might then refer to a place, Pak or Paku, with both names then giving the meaning man of Paku. There are a few more names that we could go through, but I think that this video has demonstrated the synchronicity of historical figures from the Amarna period and the early monarchy period of the Israelites that so many believe to be a fabrication of 7th century Israelite scribes. In fact, if you do not subscribe to the new chronology and revised Egyptian dating of the 3rd intermediate period, then this video would only serve as evidence on your part that the Davidic kingdom never existed and that the stories were taken from earlier sources and applied to themselves. The Amarna period would be one of those earlier sources. This is why the Egyptian timeline must be corrected, and I'll probably start doing a lot more videos addressing ancient chronology. Of course, I'll still cover biblical prophecy, but establishing the history is just as important in understanding who you are biblically. All praises to the Most High.